Alright, we're back with another episode of Beat 'em Up Style, a Unity tutorial series built for Unity development on Beat 'em Up style games. We're in episode 5, and we are doing updated movement with slices, or the concept of slices. This is a new idea that we haven't talked about yet, and so if you're just now hopping into this series, make sure that you watch the other previous episodes as everything builds on each other. Last time we talked about how to get our character to be jumping and separating two main parts of our character. One is the shadow, and then our main character if they're able to jump, because we want to have these two objects connected to each other, and then we want to make sure that they stay aligned. And so last episode was all about that, and the idea of having our shadow be directly underneath, because it conveys where our person is aligned in space, because we want to be able to strike our characters. Most of the time in beat 'em up style, it's a left to right relationship when we want to either hit or melee a character. And then sometimes there are objects that we throw, kind of like in Double Dragon, we might be able to throw knives at our opponents. And so we want to make sure that things are aligned, and the shadows visually help us see those sorts of things. And to this week, we are going to be using this idea of slices. And this is a term that I came up with, and slices help us understand how thick our character is, so that we can have a little bit of wiggle room when we're trying to strike another character or melee or shoot something at them, to say that this is within this certain amount of range, that this character or opponent or object is strikeable from our main character. And so these slices help create these zones to know when we can be hit and other things can be hit. And most of the time, this slice, let's say that this happens to be 1.5 feet. I'm just sort of judging by a typical human, that if we're facing something, that if someone tries to punch, then that there's that amount of space to be hit. And oftentimes this is consistent from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen. So if we had a character down here, then their slice might be something like this, and 1.5 feet over there, like that. And what we're going to do then is take those slices and then convert them into colliders, so that we add them to the base or the shadow of our character, so that when we're moving left and right, we'll be able to have it stick out a little bit in front of our shadow, so that when we get close to another character or another object, we can use collision detection to say that yes, we are in line with another character. And when we execute our attack, whether it be a jumping attack or a standing attack, maybe we might attach it to a projectile, then if those objects are in line with another character, we can say, yes, you're in line, let's deal the damage that we've assigned it to be, whether it's the attack, a jumping attack, or a melee attack, etc. What we need to do now is I've updated some scripts so that the alignment of everything works well with slices. And please check in the description of this video to go and download those scripts. Even if you had looked at episode 4, the one previous to this one, I've updated them, so please download them and update them in your Unity. And then we're going to go through them step by step to make sure that everything works out. We are going to redefine some of our character's parent and relationships, so I'm going to go through all those steps too, but there's going to be 3 main parts to our character this time. So we have our root character object, which holds no sprites, but it's going to be the main object that contains all the main character and the base. And so the main character is going to be whatever your character looks like. In this case, it's my Ninja Turtle, and I'm going to have a sprite renderer on it, I'm going to have some colliders and then some scripts on it. But then also the second child object is going to be the base, which holds the shadow sprite for my character, and that's going to be the one moving around the screen. Both of them are going to be aligned vertically, and the root character is going to be the main object that moves around, and everything sort of floats along with it. And we will talk about the next main thing is that we're going to adjust the pivot points of everything so that the bottom of our shadow is going to be the bottom of our roots pivot point, because that's going to be how we're going to show when our characters are in different vertical space. The difference being this character being further away from us than this character or this character. And we want to make sure that our sprite renderers are sorting themselves so that objects that are further away appear like they're behind another object. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And then we're going to actually get into doing all of this moment. So I'll go through it step by step. But the main thing that you want to do right now is go and download the new scripts. And if you're following along with me using the characters that I'm using in this series, then please download the sprite package if you haven't done so already. And then also make sure that you have the shadow sprites as well and slice those up. So let's jump back into Unity, and I'll show you what the end goal is. Oh, I don't want Unity Hub. I want Unity itself. And let me show you what I want to have happen by the end, because we're going to construct this together in a moment. We're going to add a new collider here that's going to convey the slice of my character. And when I'm moving my character around, if I have it aligned with another character right here, we can see that this Skelly only has a collider at the foot of its character, this shadow. If we have everything aligned, we should be able to say that yes, my turtle is aligned with this other character. If I do a fake attack command, you should be able to say that yes, they're aligned, and then make that character turn red. If I get out of play, I don't have any fancy mechanics at the moment. That just mainly shows that when we're aligned, that works. So if I'm not aligned with this character and I hit my attack command, which happens to be tab in this case, nothing happens. And so I'm jamming my button, and these bases are not aligned with each other, right? And so that's what we want to be able to do, is we want to be able to tell that yes, my character is aligned with another character and I could potentially attack. So when I do and everything is aligned, I can deal damage. And next episode is going to be about dealing damage, but this episode is about lining everything up so everything visually makes sense. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So I'm going to create a brand new character, and I'm going to say that this is going to be new turtle character. And I'm going to deactivate this character so it's not visually creating some clutter. So this is the character that we want, and we want to make sure that we move it to the space where this cursor is going to be where the foot of our character is. And if we want to make sure that we go over to our handle or toggle tool handle position, we want to make sure that's set to pivot. It's going to move around if we don't, and we want to make sure that we're thinking about this as the pivot point. And so this is going to be the bottom of our character. Now, so this is going to be this one is going to hold some logic. I'm going to add those things in a moment, but let's go and create a child object. So we're going to create empty child, and this is going to be our main character. And hopefully you've been following along and you have your main character that you want, and you have it sliced up so that if you go to sprite editor, you have the pivot point of your characters set to the foot of each sprite. If you haven't done that already, then I suggest you pause this and watch one of my previous videos about y-axis sorting, and it talks about why it's so important. But basically we want to put the sorting layer of each of our sprites so that it's at the foot of our character, so that when we have things moving up and down in this space, that they look like they are rendered in front or behind other objects based on their foot position. So coming back here, in this case, we're not doing any animations yet, but I want to assign a sprite to this main character. So I'm just going to drag in this one here, and we'll just pull it into this main character. Oop, I didn't want to do that. I'll just add the sprite renderer like this, and then drag in that sprite. If nothing shows up, this is typical, this is something that could happen, then we're going to go to the sprite renderer's sorting layer, and I'm going to change this to character, and What do I want to do? Oh, maybe I want to resize this. So I'm just resizing the main character and not everything else at the moment. So I'm going to go here, I'm gonna pull this out so that it's a good size. I can see that my pivot is here for my main character, which is good. Great. And if I go back to my new turtle character, this is the root of my object. I want to make sure that this foot is everything is aligned vertically, and then it looks like the heel of my back foot is over here, and I want to make it more centered to my turtle character. So what I would do is I'd select the main character and slide it over a little bit to the left and then re-examine. Okay, so that's pretty close. I like where that is, and I want my main character to be actually slightly above the pivot point of the root. So just like that, because we're going to add our shadow in a moment right at the foot of our turtle. So let's go and click on our root, new turtle character, select new, create child. Then we're going to name this base or shadow, something like that. Base or shadow is two terms that I use commonly for this series. And we're going to add another sprite renderer. In this case, we're just going to drag in one of our shadow sprites. Let's see, where do I have it? Here it is. And we can drag in a good size one. You can pick any one that you want. And of course, we want to change the sorting layer to character. And in this case, it's obviously too small, but that's okay. We'll make sure that we have the base and shadow object selected, and we can resize this so that it fits. We're gonna make sure that the position is correct, but make it so that it fits around the torso foot box of your character. It's okay if everything's in front right now. What we're going to do is, let's say that this is a good position-ish, and then we're going to go to our sorting layer, and the reason that it looks like this one is rendered on top is because it's sort of arbitrary. I think that we might be able to, sometimes you can shift things around vertically in the hierarchy, but what we could do is force it by making sure that our order in the sorting layer is a lower number, or a number that's less than our main character's order in the layer. So we could set the main character's order in the layer to be 1, and that makes sure that 1 is a higher number than our base shadows order in the layer, and so that's going to always render on top. Our main character is going to always render on top. Now that we have these two in good relative vertical positioning, I want to go back to my root and look at the pivot point. So this is pretty good. The notes that I had for y'all is that I want to make sure that the root is the base of the shadow should be lined up at the pivot point of the main character. Sorry, of the root object. So selecting the root object, I can see that the shadow protrudes underneath this pivot point. So I'm going to go back to my base and just slightly adjust it up a little bit. Coming back here, I'm going to check that. That's great. And looking back at the notes, we want to align everything, and then we want to add the sorting group component to the root object. Going back to Unity, I'm going to look at this, look at the inspector, and I'm going to add the sorting. Where'd my cursor go? Sorting group. And by default, it's going to magically disappear because it assigns all the sprite renderers to a certain sorting layer. We want to come back and go assign this to characters. So everything should come back there. Great. And now my notes for y'all is to go and add the sprites to their respective objects. And so if you follow along with last week, we're sort of duplicating what we did last time, but making sure that everything is in the proper space again. So for our main character, we're going to add a not a rigid body. we are going to add a rigid body. We're going to go rigid body 2D, and we're going to make sure that it's set to dynamic and gravity scale is set to 0. From there, we're going to add input. So player input. And then we're going to add character movement script. And if we open up the player movement script, then the horizontal controls is going to be, I think we just typed in horizontal. Let me just double check what we had previously. Previously we had, we spelled out horizontal and vertical. Great, so we're going to come back here. Capital H horizontal, because this refers to we're using the old input system for this series. And so that refers to going back into project settings, edit project settings, into input manager. This aligns with the input manager's axes that are described here. So if you watched the previous video, hopefully that makes sense back to you. And then jump button, we're going to assign for, in this case, with spacebar, and then we're going to assign whatever button that you want. I'm using tab because it just is easier on my left hand. So jump button is assigned to space, attack button is assigned to tab. And then going into character movement, we're going to add some more components so that we can line everything up. So wait one moment and we're going to change some of these in just a second. So going back to here, we're going to go to main character now. And let me just double check what we did. Main character, sprite render, box collider, and rigid body. So main character, we have the sprite renderer. We're going to do a rigid body. Set that to dynamic and set the gravity scale to 0. And we had a box collider 2D. I think that we have it set to is trigger at the moment because we don't want to use its boundary as a barrier for the moment. So make sure that's set to is trigger. Then for the base, then we're going to add, I added a capsule collider. And by default, a capsule collider is wanting to get, once you start making it bigger, I'll show you when we make the size bigger, then it wants to get taller rather than wider. So it looks like a pill up and down. So we want to change the horizontal like this. So change the direction to horizontal, and I think then after you change it to horizontal, you can go to, go like this, and there we go. It should just overlap with the size of the shadow. The base also has a rigid body, and we also set its gravity scale to 0. Coming back to my turtle character, I don't think that I actually have, oh, I do have rigid body on this one. Okay. Make sure that everything is looking good. Okay. I lied about this rigid body for the shadow. Please take off the rigid body on the shadow base. Cool. So let's go back to character now, and let's drag in some of the respective components that this character movement now controls. So the base rigid body is, let's see, is on the turtle character. Okay, cool. So here we're going to drag in our own rigid body here. And then we're going to add the jumping character, which is your main character. We're going to drag in the main character into the rigid body here. One more thing is that we're using a little bit of ray casting to detect when we're actually landing on this shadow box. And so we're going to go to our main character and we're going to add a new child to this. So create empty, and this is going to be our ground detection, ground detect. And we want to position it so that it's near the foot of our character. You can put it near the center like this. Perfect. Come back to our main character, and then we're going to drag in that ground detect into the jump detector. And we should set this detection distance to something pretty small, so like something like 0.1. Our detection layer should be base, set to base. And then our jump gravity scale should be 1, and our falling gravity scale should be 1.5. Cool. And let's see, is there anything else? I think we're getting pretty close. Let's test this out. Oh, before we do that, let's go to make sure that this character does jump. Does this character jump? Yes, we're making it so that this character jumps in this case. And let's see, click into this area, we'll hit jump, our character did jump, and then fell through. So one thing that we're missing is that we go to our base shadow child object, and we need to assign this layer to be base, because that's what the jump detection system is looking for. It's looking for a collision with our base. So let's go back here, let's hit space, let's see if this works. Cool. The jump height for this character is obviously too high, so we can go back to our main turtle character and change the jump value to something more reasonable. It was set to 10, and I'll just send it to 5. Attempting to jump again. And that works. If I move left to right, then my character is moving left to right. I think the smoothness is kind of too high. Where we left off last week, I set it to be pretty low, so 0.1. So going back to my main character, let's change this from 0.5 to 0.1. That way your character is not going to feel like it's on ice skates. And then you can adjust the horizontal speed to something appropriate, right? Everything is dependent on the scale and size of your sprites and how large you make them. So most of the time your V speed is going to be slightly smaller than your horizontal speed because your character is going to be covering ground in the vertical space a little bit slower than the horizontal space. And it's going to be up to you to decide what makes sense. My jump height is still a little bit too strong here, but you should see that when your character is on base, this box should check itself. And I'm going to tweak this and stop fooling around with it too much. If it feels like your character is falling a little too fast, then I would adjust the falling gravity scale to something smaller. Some games have your character... Okay, that feels good. Great. Some games have your character falling down faster than they jump, so that's the case that we have these two jumping in gravity scales. And now, so we have our character movement, we have our player input set. I'm going to get out of play, and let's just double check that when I move my character over here, does it look like my character when the foot of our turtle character is in front or behind visually our skelly? That looks right? Yes, that looks correct, right? Because this turtle is further away from us, so when it's further away, objects in front obscure objects in the back. And let's just test this as we move downward. If it looks like when their feet are aligned or really close, that our character is now in front of our skelly. One thing that we want to make sure, that in case this doesn't look right and you've done everything correctly so far, is that make sure that you've watched the previous videos about that we talked about Y sorting access. So if you haven't done that, let's just go back to edit and go to project settings and then go to graphics. Then look right here for camera settings. transparency sort mode, change this from, I think it's default, go to custom access, and then remove any numbers that you see in the X, Y, and Z, and just make sure that Y has a 1 on it. We can close that, and then your Y sorting layer should be working correctly. Great, so we're nearly done now. We're now going to add another script, which is going to be set at the base of our main character, so the root character, and we're going to add in this combat script, which is the combat tester. It basically is going to be something we're going to build upon, but not the full-fledged combat. But right now, what it's going to do is we're going to add a new collider to our base, and it's going to extend from the middle of our base to out in front to wherever our character is facing, and that's going to allow us to know when we're in front of an object that we want to be able to hit. And it's going to be the size of the slice that we think is appropriate. So again, slice is going to be what we perceive as the thickness of our character, so that it can hit and be hit. So we're going to go to our base shadow and add a new collider. In this case, it could be a capsule collider if you want. It could be a box collider. I'm going to pick box collider 2D. And then I'm going to define the size of it by editing it and pulling it out so that's just a little bit in front and moving it out like this. So whatever you think is appropriate, maybe the extent of this character's arm or just a little bit in front. And from there, make sure that we add it to the base shadow, right? And not the root object. So coming back over here, we're going to open up the combat tester script, and we're going to, we need to be able to drag in this particular box collider and not the capsule collider, right? Because we only want to be testing this one for our alignment detection. And how do we do that? This it gets kind of tricky. We're going to create 2 inspector windows because it's not easy to drag in other colliders into a field. And so let's lock this one, and we're going to create a new tab. We can right click into any window and we can add tab, and we're going to add a new inspector window. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So let's just drag this over so that we can see this inspector window somewhere. And so now we have 2 inspector windows and we've locked one of them. And we're going to come back to our, in this case, we've locked the inspector window for our base here. Now let's go and select the root object. And we can see that there's this combat tester right here. We basically want to drag in this box collider, which represents that slice that we were talking about all episode. And all we have to do is drag in the box collider 2D into the inline collider. So inline collider is basically going to allow us to know when we are in line with another object. Because we want to ignore all other colliders on our character, we only want to use this box collider that we have protruding over here, because we don't want to have a false positive. We want to isolate this particular collider, and that's why we want to make sure that it's only this collider that we're examining. From there, we can see that there's an enemy layer, and this makes sense that this character only wants to deal damage to other enemies and not to heroes or maybe our player companions. And so when we look at our enemy layer, we want to make sure that first our Skelly over here with this base collider has its layer set to enemy. I'm going to get rid of this tab so that we don't have more than one inspector. So I'm looking at the Skelly object, and I want to make sure that its layer is set to enemy. Okay. And going back to here, we have to set our enemy layer to belong to enemy. So this box that we have right here, this one that's protruding, is only looking for enemy layer colliders. I think we're nearly done. what happens here is I have a list of colliders that this box collider has run into, and when I hit tab, it's gonna check. It's gonna ask itself, am I colliding with any other colliders that belong to the enemy layer? If I do, then I'm going to fill this list of colliders. And then we'll know that I've run into an enemy collider. And we'll do some things in code that affect damage, etc. But basically, this is a visual tool for me just to see that if I've run into something and I hit my attack button, this is going to populate with the other colliders that I've run into. In the end, this is not something that we're going to ship with the game or make it visible, but right now it's a tool that helps me see when I run into things. We're nearly done. So I'm going to select this, and I'm going to split everything so that I can see this inspector window like this. Cool. Because I want to see this list pop up. And as I get close, oh, you can see that this thing is twisting and moving around. So we need to come back to our base, and we want to make sure that we don't want things moving around. We want to go to our rigid body, and we want to constrain over here. So rigid body constraints. We want to freeze rotation. So going back here, hopefully that fixes it. We bump into this, and if I hit tab, then I've run into the skelly and it's turned red. One other thing is we want to make sure that this base, even though that worked, we want to turn our box collider to is trigger so that we can move into the space and not use that collider as a border or a barrier. So I can move into this area here. I'm still bumping into it because my other collider is there. And then when I hit tab, then it works. It seemed like, let's see, our main character is not following our other character. And so let's see what is going on here. There is a parameter we need to change for our main character. Let me jump into my previous version. Okay, cool. So in our main character, we want to set its rigid body to kinematic. I forgot to tell you to do that. And let's try that again. Moving up and down, the turtle follows, and then when I get close, I know that my base collider is in line with our with this skelly, and then makes it turn red in the code. We'll look at the code in one moment. One other thing, let's just double check. I'm gonna try to not line it up well, and then hit tab, and that's not turning anything red. And you can see that this collider list is 0. So when I'm spamming tab, they're not aligned, they're not overlapping. I'm not registering any collisions with any objects. If I come over here, then you can see that I ran into the Skelly's capsule collider, which is exactly what I want, right? If we constructed this Skelly correctly, then we can see that this Skelly only has one collider on it. We'll do some more to build up our enemies next episode when we actually do combat. But this Skelly collider with the layer of enemy is what we're looking for. And so when things align, we know that we've lined it up. The next thing to do is decide how we want to deal damage. And that's what we're going to do next episode. Let's quickly look at the mock combat tester script. And just if you're curious, what's happening here is we have an inline collider. That's the collider 2D that we're using as the box collider at the base of our character. And then we have a layer mask, which we can define is the enemy layer that belongs to it, so that we are only checking for enemies for our characters. And then we are interacting with our input script, and we're pulling in information when we're pressing the attack button. And we're only checking to see that when we press the attack, to see if we're overlapping with another collider. So we're not using on trigger enter or on collision enter. We're actually using overlap collider. And then we're seeing if we are overlapping with another collider, and if that's the case, then we are turning that other object's spread renderer red. This is not something that we're going to be using at the end of our series, but right now it's just more of a visual tool, again, just to make sure that things are working correctly. But this mechanic right here is basically saying that collider that we added, this one right here, if it happens to be overlapping with another collider that we defined as belongs to the enemy layer, in this case it's this enemy layer, if it is, then we are going to do something, and in this case that something is turn the other object spread renderer red. It's pretty simplistic. We're going to get rid of this actually in the next episode, but this is going to help us know that everything is lined up. I hope you found this episode helpful. We're going to keep rolling with this series, and I'll catch you guys next episode. See ya.